My son sent me a text message on my 65th birthday that broke my heart but saved my bank account. He wrote, "Dad, stop calling us. Don't expect us to take care of you in your old age because I have my own life and family now. Sell your big house and check yourself into a nursing home." I read the message twice, took a sip of my scotch, and walked to my wall safe. He had no idea that the very house he was telling me to unload was the only thing standing between him and a prison cell. He had no idea that the lavish lifestyle he'd grown so comfortable with was being carried by loans he'd long since forgotten signing. I didn't rage. I simply opened my ledger and resolved to collect what was owed. My name is Gerald Harmon, and this is the story of how I taught my ungrateful son that the bank of Dad is officially closed. Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge, the place where real family stories get told without flinching. If these stories sit with you the way they sit with me, I'd be glad if you'd subscribe and leave a like. It means more than you know. Before we go any further, drop one word in the comments describing exactly how you're feeling right now. Just one word. I'd love to read them. A quick note, some elements of this story have been shaped for the audio format, and any resemblance to specific real individuals is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the center of it. Today was my 65th birthday. I hadn't expected a party. I knew Nadine was gone, and she had been the one who used to fill this house with balloons and the scent of roasting chicken. But I had expected a call, just 5 minutes, just some sign that someone remembered I was still here. I sat in my wingback chair, the one facing the fireplace where no fire burned. On the small side table, my phone lay dark and silent. I had checked the volume 3 times to be certain I hadn't missed anything. I hadn't. At 7:00 in the evening, the screen finally came to life. My heart did a pathetic little jump in my chest. I reached for it, my hands steady. I had been a structural engineer for 40 years. I built bridges that withstood earthquakes. My hands do not shake. It was a text from Colton. Not a call, not a video chat. With my grandson Theo, just a block of text. I slipped on my reading glasses and focused on the words. "Dad, Viveka and I have been talking. You are reaching retirement age officially today. We want to set some boundaries now to avoid awkwardness later. Don't expect us to take care of you or invite you to live with us when you get too old. I have my own life, my own family, and my own financial pressure. You need to be realistic. Sell your house, use the money to pay for a facility, and don't become a burden on us. Happy birthday." I read it once, then read it again out loud, my voice sounding raspy in the empty room. Happy birthday. That was the kicker. He had driven the knife into my chest and then stuck a greeting card on the handle. I looked around the living room. I looked at the grand piano that Colton had learned to play, on lessons that ran me $300 a month for 6 years. He hadn't touched a key since he was 18. I looked at the mantel where his college graduation photo sat. I paid for that degree. I paid for the dorm, where he partied the books he never read, the fraternity fees that purchased him friends. Another man might have wept. A weaker one might have picked up the phone, begging for some explanation, asking what he'd done wrong. But something strange was shifting inside me. The hot flush of shame that had begun creeping up my neck went suddenly completely cold. It froze solid. The engineer in me stepped forward. I was looking at a structural failure. When a bridge shows signs of collapse, you don't stand there grieving the concrete. You condemn it. You restrict access. You cut your losses. I set the phone down gently. I rose and walked to the kitchen. I poured 2 fingers of the bourbon I had been saving for a special occasion. I suppose this qualified. It was the night my illusions finally died. I took a sip and let the burn settle. Then I moved into my study. That room was my sanctuary, old paper and lemon polish, a smell I trusted. Behind the heavy oak desk hung a painting of the Portland skyline. I swung the frame aside. Behind it sat a steel wall safe. I worked the dial. Left to 14, right to 38, left to 27. The tumblers clicked with a clean, satisfying precision. The heavy door swung open. There was no cash inside. I never kept cash where fire could reach it. What I kept were documents, stacks of them. Most people looked at me and saw a retired engineer coasting on a pension. They saw an old man behind the wheel of a 6-year-old Chevy truck. Even Colton thought I was just scraping by, sitting on a nest egg that was slowly cracking. He was wrong. I reached into the safe and lifted out a thick black leather binder. I set it on the desk and clicked on the green banker's lamp. The light fell across the cover. This was my ledger. 5 years ago, when I sold my shares in the construction firm, I walked away with $4 million after taxes. I never told Colton. I wanted him to build his own character. I wanted him to work hard the way I had. I failed. I opened the binder. Inside were plastic sleeves, and inside each sleeve was a document. These were not sentimental scraps. They were promissory notes, legally binding notarized promissory notes. I turned to the first page. It was dated 10 years ago. Colton had just graduated. He needed a car to show clients he was a serious real estate agent. He wanted a Porsche Cayenne. I told him a Toyota was reliable. He told me image was everything. Viveka, his girlfriend at the time, had sneered at my truck, so I bought him the Porsche. $80,000, but I made him sign. I remembered the moment clearly. He was laughing, dangling the keys, barely skimming the paper. I slid across the table. "Dad, why do we have to be so formal?" he'd asked. I told him business was business. He signed it with a flourish, a careless scroll that looked arrogant on the page. I traced my finger across the signature. Promissory note 001. Principal amount $80 so. Interest rate 2%. I turned the page. The wedding. That wedding. Vivica wanted a vineyard in Willamette Valley. She wanted imported orchids and a live-string quartet. I suggested a modest church ceremony right here in Portland. She cried. She told Colton I was trying to ruin her dream. Colton came to me, eyes downcast, asking for help. I wrote the check, $150,000. Promissory note 005, signed by both Colton and Vivica. They were so drunk on champagne, they probably thought it was a guest book. I kept turning the pages, the down payment on their penthouse, the bailout. When Colton's credit cards buckled after their European trip, the seed money for Viveka's boutique that quietly collapsed. I stopped at the final page. It was from 6 months ago. Colton had shown up pale and sweating. He'd gambled on a risky real estate flip and lost. He needed $50,000 to cover the gap, or he'd lose his license. I gave it to him. I looked at the total at the bottom of my spreadsheet. $482,500. That was principal alone. With the accrued interest, it was north of $500,000. But the money wasn't the weapon. The weapon was a small paragraph sitting at the bottom of every single note. Clause 4, Section B. I adjusted my glasses and read it aloud to the empty room. The lender, Gerald Harmon, reserves the right to demand full repayment of the principal and accrued interest at any time for any reason. This note is callable on demand. Upon receipt of a formal demand letter, the borrower has 30 days to settle the debt in full before legal proceedings and asset seizure commence. Callable on demand. Colton had never read the fine print. He thought these were formality papers, something to make his old man feel important. He assumed I was a soft touch, a safety net that would always hold. I looked at the phone again. His message still glowed faintly on the screen. "Don't expect us to take care of you." I closed the ledger. The sound cracked like a gunshot through the quiet room. "You want to talk about independence, son? You want to talk about having your own life? Fine, let's see how much of a life remains when the bank moves to foreclose on it." I didn't go to bed. Sleep wasn't happening. Instead, I pulled a fresh sheet from the printer tray. I sat down and uncapped my fountain pen. I began to draft a letter, not to my son, but to my attorney, Mr. Aldridge. My hand was steady throughout. "Dear Aldridge, please prepare the necessary filings to activate Clause 4, Section B of the Harmon Family Trust immediately. Remove Colton Harmon as a beneficiary. Secondly, I am attaching copies of 15 promissory notes. I want you to issue a formal demand letter for the total amount delivered to Colton's office by courier on Monday morning." I paused. My eyes went to the photo of Theo, my grandson, sitting in the corner of the desk. He was the only innocent party in any of this. A pang of guilt moved through me, but I pressed it back down. If I didn't cut the rod out now, Theo would grow up to become exactly what his father was entitled: soft, in the wrong ways, cruel in the wrong ways. I kept writing. If payment is not received within 30 days, initiate foreclosure proceedings on all collateral, including his primary residence and personal vehicles. I signed my name, Gerald Arthur Harmon. The sun was beginning to rise over Portland. Gray light seeped through the blinds, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of fatherhood is a heavy one, especially when you spend decades carrying a child who refuses to use his own legs. But the burden of being a creditor, that is something else entirely. It is just math. I walked to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee. The text from Colton no longer hurt. If anything, I was almost grateful for it. He had handed me the permission I needed to stop being his father and start being his teacher. He wanted me to sell the house. He wanted me to vanish into some facility and wait to die so he could collect whatever was left. I took a sip of black coffee. It was bitter and hot. Monday was going to be a very interesting day for the real estate market in Portland. My son was about to learn that when you burn a bridge, you had better not be standing on it. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Pittick building was silent and fast. My ears popped as the doors parted, opening onto the polished marble lobby of Aldridge and Associates. This was a place where fortunes were shielded and lives were quietly taken apart, usually with the stroke of a very expensive pen. I walked past the receptionist who knew me by name, gripping my black leather ledger against my chest like a shield. I wasn't here to build anything today. I was here to pull the ground out from under my son. Franklin Aldridge was waiting for me. We had been friends for 30 years, going back to when I was a site manager, and he was a public defender with holes in his shoes. Now he wore Italian suits and carried eyes that had witnessed every variety of human greed there was. He didn't offer me coffee. He read my face and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water instead. He settled behind his mahogany desk, a fortress of glass and steel, with a view of the city that Colton so desperately wanted to own. I didn't say a word. I unlocked my phone and slid it across the desk to him. Colton's text was still glowing on the screen. Aldridge put on his reading glasses. He read it without a sound. His expression held steady. No gasp, no head shake. Just a long, slow breath out through his nose, the kind a doctor releases when he spots something on an X-ray that he didn't want to find. He pushed the phone back across to me. So, he said, his voice low and gravelly, "It begins." I nodded. I told him I was done waiting. I told him the time for lectures and second chances had passed. I set the black ledger on his desk. Aldridge opened it. He worked through the promissory notes page by page, his eyes moving across the dates, the figures, the signatures. He slowed at the note for the Porsche. He paused at the wedding note. He lingered on the one for the penthouse down payment. Then he looked up at me, a small, sharp smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "You kept them," he said. "You actually kept them all." I told him I never threw away a contract. Aldridge closed the book and leaned back, fingers steepled together. He had the look of a man who had just caught the scent of something. "Gerald," he said, "do you understand what you're holding here? This isn't just a record of loans. This is a nuclear option. Most parents hand money to their children and call it a gift. They might say loan, but they never put it on paper. They never get it notarized. So, when the kid walks, the parent has no legal ground to stand on. But this is different." He tapped the leather cover. "These are demand notes, Gerald. Do you remember what I told you when we drafted these templates 10 years ago? I told you the acceleration clause is the most dangerous instrument in contract law. Clause 4, Section B. It means you don't have to wait for a missed payment. You don't have to wait for him to go under. You can call the entire balance principal plus interest simply because you choose to." I asked him to walk me through the process. I needed to hear it laid out. I needed to understand exactly what was going to happen to my son. Aldridge rose and moved to the window, looking down at the wet streets of Portland. "Here is exactly how it works," he said, turning back toward me. "We draft a formal demand letter today. We cite every single note in that book. We calculate interest compounded annually at the federal minimum rate being generous, and the total comes in just under $500,000. We send the letter by certified mail to his office, not his home, his office. We want his secretary to sign for it. We want the timestamp on record." He let that sit for a moment, letting the shape of the strategy settle. "Once that signature lands, the clock starts moving. 30 days, Gerald. He has exactly 30 days to write you a check for $480 to $500. If he can't, and we both know he can't, he is in default. On day 31, we file a motion for summary judgment. Because these notes are notarized and the signatures are valid, there is no trial, no jury. The judge looks at the paperwork, sees the debt, and bangs the gavel. I asked what comes after the judgment. Aldridge walked back to his desk and leaned over it, eyes fixed on mine. "That is when the real work begins. We get a writ of execution. That gives the sheriff the authority to seize assets and satisfy the debt. We freeze his bank accounts. We garnish his wages. We put a lien on that fancy penthouse he's so proud of. And since that penthouse is almost certainly mortgaged to the limit, our lien triggers a default with his mortgage lender. The bank will foreclose on him before we've even broken a sweat." He settled back into his chair, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "We will strip him, Gerald. We will strip him of his credit score, his assets, his standing, and his ability to borrow a single dollar from anyone in this country for the next 7 years. He won't be able to rent an apartment. He won't be able to lease a car. He will be financial dust. I looked down at the ledger. I thought about Colton at 5 years old learning to ride a bike. I remembered the way he used to look it up at me like I was the strongest man alive. I remembered the afternoon I taught him to tie his shoes. A wave of nausea moved through me. Was I really about to do this? Was I really going to dismantle my own son's life over a text message? I looked at Aldridge. I told him perhaps this was too far. Maybe I should simply cut Colton out of the will and leave it there. Maybe I should just let him drift. He is still my boy, Franklin. He is still the kid I used to carry on my shoulders. Aldridge didn't blink. He reached into his desk drawer and produced a file. He tossed it onto the desk. It slid across the mahogany and came to rest directly in front of me. "Open it," he said. I opened it. It was a background check, a full financial investigation report. I asked him what I was looking at. "I ran this on Colton 6 months ago." Aldridge said, "When you told me he needed that $50,000 for the real estate deal, I wanted to verify the deal was legitimate. It wasn't. There was no real estate deal. Gerald, he used your $50,000 to clear a gambling debt with a bookie in Las Vegas." I stared at the report. The wire transfers were right there with dates attached. Aldridge leaned forward, his voice hard and flat. "He didn't just disrespect you, Gerald. He has been stealing from you. He has been lying to your face. And that text message, that wasn't an emotional outburst. That was a calculated move. He believes he has squeezed everything he can get, and now he is throwing the rind away. He thinks you are weak. He thinks you are a lonely old man who will absorb whatever he dishes out because you are hungry for connection." He pointed a finger at me. "If you walk away from this, you are not saving him. You are enabling a monster. He is 32 years old. If consequences don't find him now, they never will. And what about your grandson? What about Theo? Do you want Theo growing up under a man who treats his own father as a resource to be used and discarded?" The mention of Theo was what did it. I thought about my grandson watching his father, learning from him. I thought about that same cycle of entitlement and selfishness carrying itself into another generation. I closed the file. Every trace of hesitation was gone. The engineer was back in charge. The structural failure had been confirmed. The demolition order had to be signed. I looked at Aldridge. I told him to do it. Aldridge nodded. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Amber, bring in the notary and the standard demand letter templates and pull the trust documents for the Harmon estate. We are making some amendments." For the next hour, the only sound in the office was the scratch of my pen moving across paper. I signed the amendments to the trust, cutting Colton out entirely. I set up a new irrevocable trust for Theo, accessible only when he turned 25, with a clause requiring him to be employed and drug-free. Then came the demand letter. Aldridge handed it across the desk. It was brief. It was cold. It was terrifyingly formal. Outstanding debt obligations. "Dear Mr. Harmon, this firm represents your creditor, Mr. Gerald Harmon. Pursuant to the terms of the attached promissory notes, we are hereby exercising the acceleration clause effective immediately. You are required to remit the total sum of $480 to $500 within 30 calendar days. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action." I held the pen above the signature line. My hand didn't shake, but my heart sat in my chest like a stone. This was it, the point of no return. Once this letter went into the mail, there was no pulling it back. I wasn't simply asking for money. I was declaring war. I thought about his text message one final time. "Don't expect us to take care of you." I signed my name. The ink was black and permanent. Aldridge took the letter and slid it into a crisp white envelope. He pressed a red stamp onto the front. "Certified mail. Return receipt requested." "It goes out in the morning, Run," Aldridge said. "He will have it by Monday." I got to my feet. I felt tired, but underneath the exhaustion there was a strange clean clarity. The ambiguity had burned away. The relationship was no longer held together by guilt or obligation. It was now a matter of contract. I had one last question for Aldridge. I asked him whether he thought Colton would call me when the letter arrived. Aldridge rose and extended his hand. His grip was firm. "He will call you Gerald. He will scream. He will cry. He will threaten. But for the first time in his life, he will be calling you with real respect. Because for the first time in his life, he will understand that you are not just his father. You are the man who holds the keys to his cage." I walked out of the office and back to the elevator. The doors closed behind me. I watched the floor numbers count down on the display. 40, 30, 20. I was descending to street level, back to the rain, back to my empty house. But I wasn't going back as a victim. I was going back as the plaintiff. And God help the defendant when court is in session. While I was sitting in a lawyer's office signing away their inheritance, my son and his wife were seated at the most expensive brunch spot in downtown Portland. The Copper Vine was the kind of place where a glass of orange juice ran $15, and the walls were draped in velvet. It was a place built for being seen, and Colton and Vivica lived for exactly that. They had a prime window table bathed in the same gray light that pressed so heavily on me, though to them it probably looked like silver. Colton's phone buzzed against the white tablecloth. He glanced at it, and a slow, arrogant grin spread across his face. He didn't pick up to call me. Not a flicker of concern crossed his features. He simply angled the screen toward Vivica so she could read my texts. He folded. Colton said it loud enough for the neighboring tables to catch every word. I told you he would. The old man is predictable. Viveka read the message, the one where I had fabricated a plan to sell the house and check into a nursing home. She let out a laugh like breaking glass. She clapped her hands together, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. That ring was as unpaid for as everything else in their lives. But in that moment, she looked like a queen who had just claimed new territory. Finally, she said, lifting her mimosa, I thought he was going to drag this out for months. I was already researching lawyers to have him declared mentally incompetent. But this is so much cleaner. Did he say when the sale goes through? Colton took a slow bite of his lobster, Benedict chewing deliberately. He says next week. A quick sale to an investment firm. That means cash Viveka, liquid cash. Zillow puts that house at $1.5 million. Even at $1.2 for a fast close, that is a serious sum. They didn't ask about my health. They didn't discuss which facility I might choose. They didn't wonder whether I was frightened or alone. Instead, a napkin appeared on the table, along with a gold pen. Viveka began to write not a thank you note. She was running numbers. Okay, she said, a predatory gleam lighting up her eyes. Let's be conservative. Say the net proceeds come to $1 million after whatever small mortgage he has left. A decent nursing home runs about $6,000 a month. But why should we pay for decent? He doesn't need luxury. He just needs a bed and a cafeteria. Colton nodded, waving down the waiter for another round. Exactly. There is a state-subsidized facility in Salem. It's fine. It's clean. Park him there, and the cost is negligible. The bulk of the equity stays untouched. Viveka drew a circle on the napkin. We need to get at that capital now, Colton. We cannot wait for him to die. That could take 20 years. The moment that check clears, you need to get power of attorney over his accounts. Tell him you need to manage his portfolio to protect him from scams. He trusts you. He's pathetic like that. I am watching this scene play out in my mind, and it makes my blood run cold. But what came next was even worse. They began to spend the money. They carved up my life's work between bites of toast. First the debts, Colton said, waving his hand as though brushing away a fly. I'll clear the credit cards. That's about 40 grand. No big deal. But then, babe, look at this. He turned his phone around. A listing for a brand new Range Rover, matte black exterior, red leather interior. I can't keep showing up to the firm in that 3-year-old BMW, he said. It's embarrassing. The partners are watching. This car says something. It's only $120,000. If I put $50 down from Dad's money, the monthly payments are nothing. Viveka leaned in, scrolling her own phone. We are absolutely upgrading the Maldives trip. No more economy. We are flying Emirates first class. And I want the water villa with the private slide. It's $10,000 a night, but we have earned it. Dealing with your father's nonsense has been exhausting. We need to decompress. She looked across the table, her expression turning serious. Ann Colton the Kelly. You promise me. If this came through, you promise me the Himalayan Kelly. The reseller has one for $30,000. It holds value better than gold. Colton reached over and kissed her hand. Consider it done. The moment the funds land, I'll transfer a management fee to myself, and we go. They clinked their glasses together. To family, they said. But they didn't mean me. They meant themselves, the polished, hollow version of a family they were projecting to the room. Under the table, Colton's leg was bouncing. He checked his phone again, and this time, it wasn't my message he was looking at. It was a bank notification. Insufficient funds. His card had been declined at a parking meter that very morning. He swiped it away, his jaw tightening for just a moment before the smile snapped back into place. Don't worry about the bill, he told Vivica. I'll use the emergency card. We are rich now. It's just a matter of timing. They laughed loud and raucous, oblivious to the waiter watching them with undisguised contempt. They were celebrating a victory that had not happened. They were splitting the spoils of a war they had already lost without knowing it. Vivica gazed out at the rain-slicked street. You know, she said, her voice wrapped in counterfeit sympathy. I almost feel sorry for him. Leaving that house must be hard. It holds so many memories of your mother. Colton shrugged. He needs to move on. He's been stuck in the past too long. We are actually doing him a favor. Honestly, we are pushing him to let go. We are the good guys in this story. They genuinely believed it. That was the most chilling part. They had bent reality so completely that in their own minds, stripping an old man of his home and depositing him in a state facility was an act of kindness. They finished their meal and left a table in disarray and a tip that was an insult in dollar form. Let's swing by the dealership, Colton said as they pushed back their chairs. Just to test drive it, get a feel for it. Viveka looped her arm through his. And after that, the travel agent. I want to book those tickets today. I want to post the confirmation on Instagram tonight. Everyone needs to know we are going to the Maldives. They walked out of the restaurant, stepping around a puddle, heads held high. They looked like a power couple. They looked like winners. They had no idea that across town, a courier was lifting a thick white envelope from the desk of Franklin Aldridge. They had no idea that the countdown on their lives had already begun. They were mapping out a vacation when they should have been arranging a funeral for their lifestyle. The arrogance was blinding them, and I was counting on it. I needed them riding high on greed, so that when the fall came, it would shatter every bone in their financial bodies. 2 weeks had passed since I directed Aldridge to prepare the legal guillotine. 2 weeks of complete silence from my end. No calls, no texts. I simply sat in my house, surrounded by the ghosts of 40 years of marriage, and waited. I knew they would come. Greed has its own gravitational pull, and my house was the sun they had been orbiting all along. They chose Thanksgiving for their visit. There was something sickeningly poetic about that. A holiday built around gratitude was about to become an appraisal session. I watched the Porsche roll into the driveway at 10 in the morning. I had paid for that car, but as I watched Colton slam the door, I understood that the arrogance he stepped out wearing was something he had developed entirely on his own. Vivica climbed out next, her sunglasses on, despite the flat, overcast Portland sky. She studied the house with the detached squint of a developer sizing up a demolition project, not the warmth of someone returning somewhere familiar. And then there was Theo. My grandson tumbled out of the back seat, clutching a toy fire truck, the only innocent thing within a 50-mile radius. I opened the front door before they could knock. I wanted to hold the threshold. Theo spotted me, and his face lit up instantly. "Grandpa!" he shouted, dropping the fire truck and sprinting toward me with both arms thrown wide. My heart, which I'd believed had hardened into stone over the past 2 weeks, cracked just slightly. I bent down to catch him, but before Theo could reach me, Viveka's hand shot out. She snagged his collar and pulled him back. "Theo, honey, no!" she said, her voice sharp and theatrical. "Don't throw yourself at Grandpa. Remember what we talked about? Grandpa is old and tired. You could hurt him, or catch something." I straightened up slowly, my joints announcing themselves. I wasn't sick, I wasn't fragile. I had put in 3 miles on the treadmill that very morning. But to them, I was already a corpse waiting on the paperwork. "And hello, Dad," Colton said, moving past me into the hallway without offering his hand. He carried expensive cologne, and something else, a thin current of anxiety underneath it. His eyes swept the living room, cataloging the corners, checking for signs of decay and neglect. "We brought a turkey," Viveka announced, brushing past as well. "Pre-cooked from Trader Joe's. We didn't want you fussing with the oven. At your age, gas appliances can be genuinely dangerous." She didn't linger for a response. She walked straight into the dining room. I trailed behind them, feeling less like the owner of the house and more like a spirit haunting its own rooms. I had expected an awkward family lunch. Football on in the background, small talk about nothing. I was being naive. They hadn't come to eat. They had come to tag. Viveka reached into her oversized designer bag and produced a stack of bright orange sticky notes. She peeled the first one free. The sound, a sharp little zip cut, clean through the silence of the house. She crossed to the mahogany sideboard, the one Nadine and I had purchased in London 30 years ago, and pressed the orange note against the polished wood. One word in thick black marker: "Keep." I stood at the kitchen island with my coffee watching the violation unfold. I said nothing. I became the observer, the predator motionless in the tall grass, watching the prey move through the clearing, unaware the wind had already shifted. "What exactly are you doing?" "Viveka?" I asked, my voice flat and calm. She didn't look up. She moved on to the china cabinet. Zip. Another note. Keep. "Just getting organized, Gerald," she said airily. "Colton told me the house goes on the market next week. We are helping you sort out what matters and what doesn't. You can't bring all this heavy furniture into a nursing home. The rooms there are small. So we are marking the pieces we are willing to take off your hands. Willing to take off my hands. As though stripping my home was an act of generosity. Colton appeared from the living room with a tape measure in his hand. He was running it along the floor-to-ceiling windows. "These drapes have to come down," he muttered just loud enough to carry. "They are dated. If we want to flip this place or bring in tenants before selling, we need light. Open concept. We should probably open up the wall between the kitchen and dining room." He turned to me, snapping the tape back into its casing. "Dad, do you still have the blueprints from the '95 renovation? I need to know which walls are load-bearing. Viveka wants to design it for entertaining." I took another sip of coffee and let the bitterness settle. "I thought the house was being sold to cover my care," I said. "Why does the load-bearing structure matter to you?" Colton gave a short, nervous laugh. "Well, yeah, eventually, but we need to get the value right first. Or maybe we hold it as a rental for a few years, let the market do the work. You don't really understand how this works, Dad. You're old school. Let me handle the asset side. You focus on resting." Resting. That was their word for dying. I watched Viveka drift toward the fireplace. Hanging above it was the oil painting of the Portland skyline, the one that concealed my wall safe. She cocked her head at it, studying it. "This is hideous," she announced. Zip a note went straight onto the canvas. "Sell." I felt a hot surge of rage move through me, but I pressed it down. Not yet. The trap wasn't fully closed. I needed them to go further. I needed to see exactly where the bottom of their behavior was. They moved through the house the way a swarm moves, purposeful and indiscriminate. Zip. Keep on the wingback chair. Zip. Trash on my collection of engineering journals. Zip. Keep on the silver tea set Nadine had treasured. They didn't ask me a single question, not one. "No, Dad, does this piece mean something to you?" "No, Gerald, would you like to hold on to this?" I had already ceased to be a person in their accounting. I was simply an obstacle standing between them and the inventory. Theo sat on the floor with his toy fire truck, looking around at the room, slowly filling with orange notes. He glanced up at me, eyes wide and unsettled. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "why is Mommy putting stickers on all your things?" I lowered myself to the floor beside him. My knees made their objections known. I brought my voice down to match his. "Because, Theo," I said, smoothing his hair back, "your Mommy and Daddy are playing a game. They think they are shopping." "Can I play?" Theo asked. "No," I said gently. "This is a grown-up game for people who have forgotten how to be good. You stay with your fire truck. Fire trucks are honest. If something is on fire, they show up and tell you. They don't bring you a turkey and smile while they pick through your things." Viveka came back into the room. She had found her way to the master bedroom, my bedroom. The room I hadn't allowed anyone to enter since Nadine passed. "Colton, get in here," she called out. I rose and followed them in. Viveka was standing at Nadine's vanity table. On it sat the jewelry box, unlocked as it had always been. I never locked it because sometimes I needed to open it and catch the scent of her perfume still clinging to the velvet inside. Viveka had the lid up. She was holding Nadine's pearl necklace against her own throat, watching herself in the mirror. "These are vintage," she murmured, her voice trembling with hunger. "Real saltwater pearls. This one alone must be worth 5,000. "Put it down," I said. The room went still. It was the first command I had issued all day. Viveka turned, irritation flushing her face. She didn't put it down. She fastened the clasp around her neck instead. "Oh, calm down, Gerald. It's sitting here gathering dust." Nadine would have wanted someone to actually wear it. Someone young, someone living. Leaving it in a dark room is the real waste. I'm preserving it. Preserving it. Colton stepped between us, reading the temperature of the room. "Dad, she has a point. Mom's things, they're just things. We'll keep it all in a safe deposit box. For the family, for the family." I looked at my son. I looked at the woman he had chosen to marry. Those bright orange sticky notes had spread through my home like a rash. Standing there watching them multiply, I understood something that went beyond simple greed. These people were hollow, shells walking around grabbing at things that weren't theirs, as though possessions might fill whatever was missing inside them. I smiled. Not a warm smile, cold and dry as the air in that room. And you know what came out of my mouth? You're right. None of this is worth fighting over. Take it. Help yourselves to all of it. Put your little stickers on everything. Viveka's eyes went wide. Clear's throat. Really, really, I said. Because come Monday, not one bit of this will matter. They read surrender into that. In their minds, I'd finally broken just the senile old man who'd given up. What escaped them entirely was why I was smiling. A demand letter was, at that moment, sitting in a sorting facility at the downtown post office. 48 hours from then, a sheriff would be cataloging assets for seizure, and each item wearing one of their orange keep stickers was headed straight for a bankruptcy hearing as evidence. Be my guests, I said, with a wave toward the rest of the house. Have a look around. Treat it like your own. Then I walked out of that bedroom and left them to it. I found my way back to the kitchen and topped off my coffee. Theo was down on the floor playing. I wasn't a wounded man anymore. I was the one holding the pen on the final chapter, letting the villains scrawl their own ruin across the page before I snapped the book shut. A hush had settled over the house, broken only by that repeating zip, zip, zip of stickers being peeled and pressed. It put me in mind of a fuse burning, and I was the sole person in the room who knew the size of the charge at the other end. We gathered at the dining room table, a big mahogany slab that had borne 30 years of arguments, celebrations, and raised glasses. This particular afternoon, it bore something else. The pre-cooked turkey from Trader Joe's occupied the center of the table, wan and desiccated. Viveka hadn't troubled herself with a serving dish. She'd torn back the foil and planted the plastic container directly on the heat-resistant pad. It told you everything about how they regarded me, useful when convenient, stripped of warmth, a purely transactional arrangement. Theo was the lone bright spot, stabbing enthusiastically at his mashed potatoes, humming something under his breath. I kept my eyes on him, wishing I could pare the universe down to just this chair and that child, and let the four walls around us simply fade. But that wasn't an option. The performance had to reach its conclusion. Colton cleared his throat, the sound of a man firing up his pitch. He sloshed wine into his glass until it was almost overflowing, then never once looked in my direction to offer any. So, Dad, he began, tilting back in his chair with a manufactured ease that set my teeth on edge. We need to talk logistics. If you are serious about moving to a facility, time is money. The market is shifting. Interest rates are ticking up. You don't want to leave this house sitting on the market for months. I sliced off a piece of that turkey, dry as chalk. I worked through it at a deliberate pace, making him sit with the silence. I'm listening, I said. Colton flicked a glance over at Viveka. The glance of two people who'd blocked out this whole routine on the drive over. I ran the recent sales in your neighborhood, Colton said. The Miller house down the street sold for $1.3 million, but that had a renovated kitchen. Your kitchen is, well, it's 90s chic, but the lot size is good. I think if we list it aggressively at 1.2, we can get a bidding war going. The word dropped out of me quietly. Colton produced a smile, smooth, well-rehearsed, the kind he probably rolled out for first-time buyers he could steer. Well, yes, I'm a licensed broker, Dad. It makes sense for me to handle the listing. Why hand 3% to some stranger when it stays in the family? I'll cut my fee to 2%. That puts $12,000 back in your pocket right there. Plus, I can oversee the contractors for staging. Viveka has a real talent for that. Viveka waved her fork toward the window and joined in. We need to strip this place down immediately. That was the whole point of tagging things. All this heavy furniture boxes the room's in. Storage unit, clear everything out. Neutral white on the walls, bring in clean modern pieces. Opens it right up, makes it feel current. My gaze drifted to the bright orange note on the sideboard. Keep. Then to the one on the china cabinet. Keep. So I said, walk me through this. You're asking me to vacate my own home, pay you a commission to sell it, and rent a storage unit to warehouse furniture you've already claimed for yourselves. Colton set down, his glass jaw tightening. You are putting words in my mouth. Everything we're proposing is about protecting your equity. This is your nest egg, Dad. We want you to walk away with every dollar you're owed. And once the sale closes, where does that money go? I asked. Colton lifted a shoulder. Into a managed account. I can quarterback that side of things, too. A conservative mix, bonds, index funds, nothing volatile. Monthly draws to cover your facility costs. And whatever's left, compounds over time. Compounds for whose benefit, I asked. Yours, Colton said, his voice pitching up a notch. For your future. I set my fork on the plate. The metal clinked against the china, a clean, hard sound that cut the air between us. I pressed the napkin to my lips. Then I studied my son. Not a passing look, a real one. Behind the performance, I could see the strain, debts he hadn't breathed a word about. A structure built from borrowed time and wishful thinking. And my house was the cornerstone he needed to keep it from collapsing. You can drop the pitch, Colton, I said, keeping my voice level. You won't be listing the house. Colton stared at me. What does that mean? You can't go for sale by owner. You'll be taken advantage of. You don't understand the paperwork. I never said anything about selling it myself, I replied. What I said was, you won't be listing it because it's already gone. The silence that landed then was total, dense and pressurized the way the atmosphere gets before a storm breaks. Viveka's glass stopped halfway to her mouth, suspended. Colton's jaw went slack. What Colton breathed. I drank some water. I signed the papers yesterday morning. I lied. A private investment firm. Cash buyers purchasing as it does. No inspections, no staging crews, no freshly whitewashed walls. They named a number I accepted, and that was the end of it. We close on Monday. The color that climbed into Colton's face was one I'd never witnessed on him before. Not shame, rage. You went ahead and sold, without a word to me. For how much did you even get market value? Enough, I said, keeping it vague. Enough for what I need. Viveka brought her glass down hard. Wine jumped the rim and spread across the cloth. Who bought it, she wanted to know. Give us the firm's name. We want to review the contract. You were probably taken for a ride. You're an old man, Gerald. People prey on seniors. You could be out hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm not senile, Viveka, I said, and something cold entered my voice. I was closing multi-million-dollar infrastructure contracts when you were still learning to color inside the lines. The transaction is complete. The funds are already transferred. This is finished. Colton lurched to his feet, the chair shrieking across the floor behind him. You had no right to do that, he shouted. This is a family asset. This is my inheritance. You don't just liquidate something like this without consulting me. I am your son. I kept my eyes on him, my expression unchanged. I thought you had built your own life, Colton, your own family. Wasn't that the gist of your text? You told me to sell. You told me not to become a burden on anyone. I'm doing precisely what you asked of me, converting my assets to cash, so my care is paid for, and your name never has to come up. So, what exactly is the problem? Why are you upset? You should be celebrating. You are off the hook. But where is it going? Colton sputtered the money. Where is it going? I leaned in toward him. That is not your concern. The same way my welfare stopped being your concern a long time ago. Viveka rose now, something sharp and ugly working through her features. One fingernail polish precise aimed itself at me. You engineered this, she hissed. You knew exactly what that commission meant to us. You knew we were banking on managing that equity. You selfish old bastard. You did this in secret just to cut us out. I turned my attention to Theo. He'd gone still. His small body was pressed into the back of his chair, eyes swinging between his parents, frightened. Lower your voices, I said, quiet but with an edge under it. You're frightening the boy. I don't care, Viveka screamed. What about everything in this house? The furniture, the pearls, all the pieces we marked. The contract covers the structure, doesn't it? Everything inside still belongs to us. I rose from my chair without hurrying. I reached across and peeled the bright orange sticky note from the sideboard. Then I crushed it in my fist. That's where you've got it wrong, I said. The agreement included a vacancy clause. Every last thing in this house has to be cleared out by Monday. What you're about to hear is the moment everything I had quietly built finally came to a head. And what I discovered about the people standing in my own living room will stay with me for the rest of my life. Before we get there, tell me this. If someone close to you had been working against you all along, would you confront them in the moment or wait until every piece of evidence was in your hand? I'd arranged for a junk removal crew. They were showing up the next morning. Junk removal. Colton looked like the floor had dropped out from under him. That is a $5,000 dining table. I know. I told him I bought it. And since a nursing home room has no use for it, and since he had his own household and his own furniture, I donated it. All of it. The furniture, the silverware, the books. Every bit going to Goodwill. Pickup scheduled for 8:00 a.m. The tax deduction would be considerable. Viveka made a sound that lived somewhere between a wail and a sob. The pearls. What about the pearls? Those went to a battered women's shelter for their auction. I said I felt it was appropriate. Nadine would have wanted them going to women who were trying to fight their way out of bad circumstances. You gave away Mom's pearls, Colton whispered, and the look on his face was pure, undiluted hatred. You are sick. You are a sick, bitter old man. I didn't move a muscle. I walked around to the head of the table and stood there with both hands on the back of my chair. Get out, I said. Colton stared at me as if he hadn't heard right. What? Get out of my house, I said again. Take your cold turkey. Take your bright orange sticky notes and get out. You showed up here to assess me like a used car. You came to strip the copper from the walls before the body had even gone cold. Well, the sale is done. The window is closed. Get out. Colton squared his shoulders and puffed up his chest, trying to make himself large. I was 65, but I had built my career on construction sites. I had faced down union bosses and bent inspectors without blinking. A soft-handed broker in a leased suit was nothing to me. This isn't over, Dad, he spat. I will contest this. I will get a lawyer. I will prove you are mentally incompetent, and I will have this sale reversed. You won't see a dime of that money, I laughed. A real one this time from somewhere genuine? Go right ahead, Colton. Get a lawyer. I'd strongly encourage it, in fact. Get the best one you can find. You are going to need him on Monday. He didn't catch my meaning. He figured I was bluffing about the sale. He had no way of knowing that the attorney he actually needed wasn't for fighting a property transaction. It was for defending himself against a foreclosure. Viveka snatched up her bag. Come on, Colton, let's go. He's out of his mind. We'll call Dr. Evans. We'll have him evaluated. Oh, and we are taking the pearls. She reached toward her own neck, and I brought my hand down hard on the table. The silverware jumped off the cloth. You walk out that door wearing those pearls, Viveka and I will dial the police and report a theft. I will press charges. Do you want a criminal record stacked on top of everything else? She went still. She looked into my eyes and understood I wasn't performing. With her whole body shaking from rage, she reached back and unclasped the necklace and flung it onto the table. It came to rest with a soft clatter beside the half-eaten turkey. I hope you rot in that nursing home, she hissed. I hope you die alone. I picked the pearls up and slipped them into my pocket. I already am alone, Viveka. I've been alone since the day Nadine died. Having you two circling like vultures didn't ease that loneliness. It only made me exhausted. Colton seized Theo by the arm and hauled him up roughly from his chair. We are leaving, Theo. Don't say goodbye to Grandpa. He doesn't love us. Theo looked back at me. Tears were rolling down his face. Every part of me wanted to cross that room and hold him. I wanted him to know I loved him more than I had words for, and that every move I had made was to protect him from becoming the man currently dragging him toward the door. But I stayed where I was. I had to be the villain in their version of events so I could be something better in his future. I watched them storm out. The front door hit the frame so hard the windows shook in their panes. The Porsche engine turned over outside, an angry mechanical snarl, and then the quiet came back. I stood in the dining room. The bright orange notes still clung to everything, little flags of greed planted on whatever they would wanted to claim. I crossed to the sideboard and peeled off the one that read, Keep. I balled it up and dropped it onto the half-eaten bird. I was not going to any nursing home. I was not selling this house. And I was categorically not losing my mind. I was simply a man who had finally stopped letting people wipe their feet on him. I settled back into the chair at the head of the table. I poured myself a glass from the bottle Colton had opened. Cheap stuff, sharp and thin. I drank it all the same. Monday, I said quietly to the empty room. Monday is coming. I checked my watch. The courier would be putting the demand letter into Colton's hands at 9:00 a.m. sharp. They thought they had been cheated out of an inheritance today. They had no idea they were about to lose something far more consequential. The house sale was just the opening move. The real blow hadn't landed yet, and Gerald Harmon was holding it back until the moment was right. Monday arrived wearing the kind of hard, indifferent brightness that doesn't care what kind of weekend you had. Inside the glass-walled offices of Wexler and Finch Real Estate, the air conditioning maintained its low, costly hum. Colton Harmon sat behind his ergonomic chair, the one that had cost more than my first car, surveying everything he'd built. He had on a new suit, a charcoal Italian cut. He'd put on a credit card already running $3,000 past its limit. It didn't concern him. The way he saw it, the wire from my house sale was practically already in his account. He was borrowing against a future he considered locked in. He lifted his double-shot espresso and scanned his calendar. lunch with the developer at noon. He was going to order whatever was most expensive on the menu and drop hints about coming into substantial family capital. That was how he operated. Perform wealth until you acquire it, then keep performing so nobody notices the gap. At 9:15, the receptionist, a young woman named Amber, someone Colton had been trying to charm for months, rapped on his glass door. She looked uneasy. "Mr. Harmon," she said, "there is a courier here for you. He says it is urgent legal correspondence. He needs a signature." Colton smiled. He genuinely smiled. He stood buttoned his jacket with a practiced sweep and straightened up. He was certain it was the contract paperwork from the house. He believed I had folded completely and was forwarding the documents for him to manage the funds. "Send him in, Amber," he said, his voice pitched low and authoritative. The courier was a compact man in a gray uniform carrying a thick white envelope with a red stripe along the edge. He had no interest in Colton's suit or the city view behind him. He extended a digital pad. "Sign here," the man said. Colton swept his signature, that arrogant looping scrawl he'd been practicing since high school. He accepted the envelope. It had some weight to it. It felt like something that mattered. "Thank you, my good man," Colton said, and set the envelope on his desk. He waited for the courier to leave, let the door click shut behind him. Then, with the eagerness of someone who already knew what was inside, he lifted his letter opener, a silver blade fashioned like a dagger, and drew it across the top of the envelope. He pulled the papers free. The first thing that caught his eye was the letterhead. Aldridge and Associates. He gave a small, dismissive smirk. He knew Aldridge. An old friend of mine, a lawyer who used to turn up at our backyard cookouts. Colton probably assumed Aldridge was simply handling the asset transfer on my behalf. He unfolded the cover letter and started reading. And as the words registered, something in the room changed. The air conditioner's hum seemed to cut out. The noise bleeding in from the street outside went mute. The only thing in existence was the rushing sound building in his ears, a flood of pure panic. Demand for immediate payment of outstanding promissory notes. Colton blinked. He pulled back, convinced his eyes were failing him. He read the next line. "Dear Mr. Harmon, this firm represents your creditor, Mr. Gerald Harmon. We are writing to formally notify you that Mr. Harmon is exercising his right under Clause 4, Section B of the attached promissory notes to accelerate the debt and demand full repayment." His hands began to tremble. The paper shook with a dry, crackling sound that cut through the silence of the office like a blade. He sank into his chair, his legs no longer reliable. He turned the page. A table. A spreadsheet. Date October 12, 2013. Item Porsche Cayenne purchase. Amount $80,000. Status unpaid. Date June 5, 2015. Item wedding expenses. Amount $150,000. Status unpaid. Date January 10th, 2022. Item personal loan. Amount $50,000. Status unpaid. His eyes moved down the column, past dates he'd let slip from memory, past figures he'd quietly reclassified as gifts, past the moments I had handed him checks while he grinned and assured me he'd settle up someday. He reached the bottom, the total $480,500. Colton stared at that number. It sat on the white page like a coiled snake, perfectly still waiting. That number wasn't just a figure on a page. It was a verdict. The air left his lungs. He worked at the knot in his tie, fingers slipping on the silk. His chest had turned to concrete under the sudden suffocating weight of it all. He didn't have $400,000. He didn't have $40,000. He had $12 in his checking account and a wallet stuffed with cards that were already at their ceilings. He read on. "You have 30 calendar days from the receipt of this letter to remit the total amount in certified funds. Failure to comply will result in the immediate filing of a lawsuit, a motion for summary judgment, and the subsequent seizure of assets, including, but not limited to, real estate vehicles and garnishment of wages." Seizure of assets. Garnishment of wages. Colton looked around at his office. He thought about the BMW he leased. He thought about the penthouse he rented. He thought about a career constructed entirely on the appearance of success. If his wages were garnished, if his car got hauled out of the company lot, if his own father dragged him into court, it was finished. The partners would show him the door. The developer he was lunching with would find it very amusing. Viveka would walk. Viveka. God, Viveka. He grabbed his phone. His fingers were slick. He got the screen unlocked and punched in my number. He didn't stop to consider what time it was. He didn't stop to think about the last conversation we'd had, the one where he told me to leave my own house. He just reached out the way a drowning man reaches for anything floating nearby. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Pick up. Pick up! Pick up! You old bastard! Colton hissed under his breath, rocking in that expensive chair. On the 4th ring, the line opened. No greeting, no hello, just quiet. Dad Colton's voice cracked apart. It went high and thin, the voice of a frightened child. Dad, I just received this letter. What in the hell is this? I let a moment pass before I spoke. I was out on the porch, watching the rain come down, working through a cup of tea. Hello, Colton, I said. Steady, the voice I used when I was reading of a crack in a foundation wall. Is this some kind of joke? Colton shouted, pulling together whatever was left of his anger. Are you out of your mind? $400,000, you gave me that money. I loaned you that money, I corrected him, keeping my voice even. And you signed for it. Did you look at the attachments, Colton? The ones bearing your signature? I didn't think you were being serious, Colton shouted. No father does that to his own child. You can't call in 10 years of loans in a single day. I don't have that kind of money. I know that I said. Which is exactly why I gave you 30 days. You are a resourceful young man. You've built your own life, your own family. I have every confidence you'll work something out. Dad, please. Colton's voice fractured again. You have to put a stop to this. Aldridge is out of his mind. This will destroy me. If this gets in front of a judge, I lose my license. I lose everything. You should have weighed that when you told me to sell my home and move into a state facility. I said you wanted everything reduced to transactions, Colton. You wanted our relationship run like a business arrangement. All right then. This is business, and the books haven't been looked at in a long time. Dad, I'm sorry. I mean it. I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. I'm sorry about the text. Just call Aldridge and have him pull the letter back. I took another sip of tea. The rain had a particular beauty to it today. That's not something I can do, son, I said. It's already in the system. The clock started the moment that envelope was signed for. You have 29 days and 23 hours remaining. I'd put down the phone and start thinking about a second income. But, Dad, goodbye, Colton. I ended the call. No drama, just the red button pressed and it was done. I pictured him there in that glass office holding a dead phone, surrounded by the rubble of his own making. I could see the panic working its way up his throat, like something he couldn't swallow back down. For the first time in his adult life, my son was staring at a problem that my checkbook wasn't going to absorb. In fact, my checkbook was the one pressing the barrel to his chest. Something hollow moved through me, a flicker of grief, but I let it go. A surgeon doesn't weep over the tissue he's removing. He stays steady. He stays precise, and I still had a great deal more work ahead of me. Gravity has a peculiar quality. You rarely feel it until there is no longer any ground beneath you. For Colton, it wasn't just that the ground disappeared. It was stripped away by a court order bearing a judge's stamp issued by someone with no tolerance for unpaid obligations. I wasn't present to witness it, but I had no need to be. I knew the timetable. I knew that at 9 in the morning, Aldridge had filed the ex parte writ of attachment. I knew that by midday the legal system's reach would have extended to every financial institution in the state. And I knew that by 1 worst, Colton would be sitting across a lunch table from a client he couldn't afford to lose, attempting to pay with funds that were no longer his to touch. The restaurant was Le Montage, the kind of establishment where the napkins were thick linen and the waitstaff spoke in the hushed registers of a library reading room. Colton was dining with Mr. Wexler, a developer shopping for a broker to move 20 luxury condos. This was the deal that was supposed to rescue Colton's year. This was the commission earmarked for the gambling debts he assumed I knew nothing about. I can picture the scene without any difficulty. Colton was almost certainly leaning back in his chair, turning a glass of Pinot Noir by the stem, laughing a half beat too hard at Mr. Wexler's remarks. He was performing confidence. He was the heir apparent to the Harmon fortune. He probably ordered the Wagyu. He probably insisted he was picking up the bill, and then the check arrived. Colton would have reached into his jacket, drawn out his sleek black card holder, selected the platinum card, the one with the elevated limit, and laid it on the silver tray with a practiced offhand flick. It's on me, he would have said, a small gesture of goodwill toward their future arrangement. The waiter would have lifted the tray and moved off. Colton would have kept talking, maybe glancing at his watch. Maybe already thinking about the Range Rover test drive booked for later that afternoon. 5 minutes passed. The waiter came back. No receipt in hand. He was holding the card between two fingers, as though it were something unpleasant. "I'm sorry, sir," the waiter said, his voice dropping to that polite, annihilating murmur. "The card has been declined." Colton laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. "That can't be right," he said. "Run it again." "It's probably the chip. It's been giving me trouble." "I ran it 3 times, sir." The waiter replied, his expression a studied arrangement of professional sympathy. "The system is returning. Do not honor. Do not honor." 3 words that dismantle a man's standing faster than a fist to the jaw. Colton's easy smile began to slip. He could feel Mr. Wexler's attention settling on him. The developer hadn't said a word, but his eyes had gone sharp. In high-end real estate, a broker who can't cover lunch is not a broker who can move $20 million in inventory. "Here, try this one," Colton said, the sweat starting up on his palms as he produced his backup, the gold card. The waiter accepted it, turned, and walked away. He was back within 2 minutes. "I'm afraid this one is also declined, sir." The room seemed to tilt. The air conditioning felt like it had given up. Sweat prickled at his hairline. This was no glitch. This was a wall. I don't understand this," Colton stammered. "I used it just this morning." He looked across at Mr. Wexler. The older man was already drawing out his own wallet, the pleasant expression entirely gone. He looked like a man who had recognized a waste of his afternoon. "Put it away, Colton," Mr. Wexler said, his voice stripped of warmth, his corporate card landing flat on the table. "I'll cover it. But I think we're finished here. My partners and I require someone with a certain stability." "Wait, let me reach my bank," Colton said, pushing back his chair. "Don't bother," Wexler said, rising and doing up his jacket buttons. He didn't put out his hand. He simply left, walking out, and leaving Colton standing alone at the table with 2 useless credit cards and a half-finished steak that had become very difficult to get down. Colton moved out of the restaurant, fast not registering the looks from the other tables. He pulled up his banking app, tried to log in, access denied, "Please contact your branch." He jabbed at the screen. He tried his savings account. Access denied. He tried the joint account he held with Vivica. Access denied. He stood on the pavement in the middle of Portland's lunch rush and felt an icy draft cut straight through that expensive suit. He wasn't merely broke. He was paralyzed. The financial system had simply erased him. He called the bank. He fought through the automated menus, shouting until a human voice came on the line. "Sir," the representative said with practiced calm, "I'm showing a garnishment order and a complete asset freeze placed by the Sheriff's Department based on a filing from, let me pull this up, Aldridge and Associates. We are legally obligated to lock every account tied to your social security number." "My dad." Colton breathed. He actually went through with it. He ended the call. He had to get home. He had to find Viveka. He needed to think through a plan. He ran for the parking structure where he kept his leased BMW. But the nightmare was only changing shape. When he reached his luxury apartment building, there was no valet waiting. There was a flatbed tow truck sitting across the entrance, a massive, ugly piece of machinery, idling heavily pumping diesel exhaust into the air. And riding on the back of it, hooked up by the rear bumper, was his BMW. "Wait!" Colton shouted, sprinting toward the truck. "Stop! That's my vehicle!" He made it to the driver's door just as the truck started moving. He beat on the glass. The driver, a big man with a full beard, and the look of someone who'd witnessed 1,000 scenes, exactly like this one, rolled the window down a crack. "Step away from the truck, pal," the driver said. "You have no right," Colton shouted. "I leased this car. I don't even own it." "Right, and the leasing company got a notice of default along with a repo order about an hour ago." The driver said, his voice flat with boredom. Something about a lien holder exercising their rights. "You want to dispute it? Call the bank and move your foot before this thing rolls over it." Colton stood helpless as the truck eased into traffic, hauling his status symbol away. The BMW's alarm was chirping sadly, a digital cry for help that no one answered. Then he heard the screaming, not the car alarm. Vivica. She was planted in the lobby of the building, surrounded by 3 of their neighbors, wearing her yoga clothes and clutching a yoga mat, looking like she was about to detonate. "Colton," she shrieked when she spotted him. She came barreling through the automatic doors with no thought for who was watching. "What is going on?" she screamed, thrusting her phone in his face. "I tried to pay for my Pilates class, and they cut the card in half. I tried to get a smoothie, and it was declined. And now the concierge is telling me our key fobs for the elevator have been shut off because the rent check bounced." Colton looked at his wife. He didn't see a partner. He saw his own panic mirrored back at him with double the force and not a trace of sympathy. "It's my father," Colton whispered. He froze everything. Viveka stared at him. Her eyes went wide, then contracted into two slits of pure venom. "You told me he was bluffing," she shouted, swatting him in the chest with the yoga mat. "You told me he was a feeble old man. You said we had 30 days. He accelerated the debt," Colton said, his voice unraveling. "It's a legal mechanism, he didn't have to wait." "Then fix it," Viveka screamed. "Fix it right now. I have a hair appointment at 3. I have people coming over tonight. I cannot get into my own home." People had started to linger. The doorman was staring at the floor. The neighbors were murmuring. This was the couple who carried themselves like they owned the building, the couple who complained when the lobby arrangement wasn't fresh enough. Now they were stranded on the sidewalk, locked out, and broke hollering at each other in front of an audience. "I can't fix it," Colton said, tears pressing at the corners of his eyes. "He took everything. The accounts are frozen. The car is gone." Viveka stepped back. She looked him over with a blend of horror and contempt. "So we have nothing?" she asked. "We have nothing," Colton admitted. She didn't reach for him. She didn't say it would be all right. She looked at his empty hands and his crumbling face, and she did the math. "I'm going to my mother's," she said, her voice like ice. "Viveka, don't," Colton begged, grabbing for her arm. "Don't touch me," she snapped. "You are a failure, Colton. You promised me a life. You promised me the Maldives, and now you can't even cover a smoothie. Don't contact me until you've sorted this out." She spun around and flagged down a cab. She climbed in, and Colton watched it disappear into traffic. He realized as it turned the corner that she didn't have money for the fare either. She'd probably have her mother waiting at the curb with cash. She would be fine. She had always found a way to land on her feet. Colton was left alone in front of a building he could no longer walk into. The rain started up again. He reached into his pocket to pull up a ride, then caught himself. His app was tied to the card. The card was dead. No car, no cash, no credit, no wife, no way inside. He dropped onto the curb, the damp concrete seeping through his Italian suit trousers. He buried his face in his hands. Across the city in my warm and quiet study, I poured another cup of tea. I didn't require a front row seat to know the lesson had taken hold. I had stripped away the padding. I had removed the cushion that money puts between a man and the hard edges of the world. For the first time in 32 years, Colton was feeling the cold. I watched the phone and waited. I knew he wouldn't call just yet. He was still in shock. Still in the first stage, the one where you refuse to believe it's real. But the hunger would arrive soon enough. Soon the prospect of a park bench or a borrowed couch would stop being abstract. I lifted my cup. It was English breakfast, my favorite. The collapse was total. What remained now was to wait and find out whether anything real existed beneath the wreckage or whether my son was hollow the whole way through. The corridor of the luxury apartment building was quiet, its thick carpet breathing out a scent of lavender and old money. Ordinarily, that kind of silence meant comfort. For Colton and Viveka, planted outside door 42, it felt like the hush of a sealed vault. They had slipped into the building by trailing a delivery driver, a petty win that turned embarrassing the second they reached their own front door. The electronic lock blinked red, a small, unwavering eye of judgment. Colton pressed the key fob to the sensor again. Nothing, no tone, no click of the bolt drawing back. Just that cold, accusatory red light. He leaned his forehead against the door. He looked wrung out. The adrenaline from the restaurant and the tow truck had burned away, leaving a hollow, trembling dread in its place. Viveka, standing beside him, was not trembling. She was vibrating at a frequency that could crack glass. Arms folded the pricey yoga mat, tucked under one elbow. Like a weapon, she fixed her stare on the back of her husband's head, with the focused look of someone choosing their spot. "Open the door, Colton," she said, not loud. A hiss. "I can't," Colton said quietly against the wood. The management company must have killed the access remotely. The rent check bounced Viveka. "The lease is in default." "Then kick it in," she said. Colton turned around slowly. He looked at her the way you look at someone speaking a language you've never heard. "Kick it in." "Viveka? This is a solid oak door with a steel core, and there are security cameras on every inch of this hallway. Should I add breaking and entering to the list of suits my father is already filing?" Viveka let the yoga mat drop. It hit the floor with a dull thud. She moved in, close filling his space, her eyes gone wild. I don't care about lawsuits, Colton. I care about my belongings. My jewelry is in there. My wardrobe is in there. My entire life is on the other side of that door. You need to get me inside. I can't. Colton said, his voice splitting. The sound bounced off the walls all the way down the hall. A door opened. Mrs. Gable, the widowed woman in 405, eased her head out, took in Colton, then Vivica, and drew herself back inside. The lock clicked behind her. It was the sound of being shut out. "Look what you done," Vivica said with a sneer. "You're making us a spectacle again." Colton slid down the door until he was sitting on the floor, drawing his knees up and ruining the crease in his Italian trousers. He looked diminished. He looked like the small boy who used to crawl under the dining room table when the thunder got close. But there was no table now, and the storm bearing down on him was one he had assembled himself piece by piece over years. "Viveka, please," he said, lifting his eyes to her. "I need you in my corner right now. We need to think this through together. We can go to your mother's place. We can regroup there. I will make this right. I'll reach out to Dad again. I'll get on my knees if that's what it takes." Viveka laughed, a dry, hollow sound, with nothing behind it. "My team?" she asked. "You want me to be on your team, Colton? Take a look at yourself. You're sitting on a hallway floor. You have no car. You have no money. Your credit is gone. You don't have a team. You are a liability. That isn't fair," Colton said. "I gave you everything you asked for. The Paris trip, the car, the ring. You gave me those things with your father's money," Viveka shouted, her composure finally cracking. She moved back and forth in the narrow corridor, hands flying. "I didn't marry a man, Colton. I married a potential. I married the heir to the Harmon estate. You told me your father was flush. You told me he was old and checked out. You told me that managing his assets was basically a formality. I believed it," Colton started. "You believed Viveka mocked him. You are 32 years old, Colton. Believing isn't enough. You should have known. You should have locked down the power of attorney years ago. But you were too comfortable, too busy playing the big shot with your crowd to actually do the work of securing what mattered, securing the bag. That was how she viewed my life's work. A bag to be seized. I loved you," Colton said quietly. "I thought you felt the same." Viveka stopped moving. She looked down at him. Her expression softened, but not with warmth. It was the softening of pity. The particular pity you feel for a dog struck by a passing car. Sad, but you're not about to get blood on your hands. "Oh, Colton," she said with a sigh. "I loved the life we were building. I loved what we could have been, but love needs something solid beneath it. Love needs a foundation to stand on. I can't commit myself to a man who cannot even open his own front door." She reached into her purse. For a moment, Colton thought she was going for a tissue. She came out with her phone instead. "I'm calling a car," she said. "My mother will settle up when I arrive." "You're walking out on me here," Colton said, the panic flooding back into his voice. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," Viveka said, working the screen with her thumb. "Maybe go ask your father for a spare room." "Oh, right. You burned that down too, didn't you?" She glanced at the screen and frowned. 6 minutes out, she muttered to herself. She settled against the far wall, putting as much of the hallway between them as possible without actually leaving. They stood there without speaking. The red light on the door kept blinking. "Blink, blink, blink." "You know," Colton said, something harder coming into his voice. "You are just as responsible for this as I am. You were the one pushing for the penthouse. You were the one who had to have the Maldives. You burned through the money just as fast as I was borrowing it." Viveka raised her eyes from the phone. They were flat and cold. "But my name isn't on the promissory notes, is it?" she asked softly. Colton went still. "I never signed a single one, Colton." She went on, a thin smile at the corners of her mouth. "Your father was shrewd, I'll give him that. But you were careless. You signed every document. The car, the wedding loan, the business loan, all of it is yours to carry. I am just the spouse. And if I file for divorce before the bankruptcy lands, I can make the argument that I had no knowledge of the financial misconduct. I can walk away clean." Colton looked at her. The air went out of him. He saw it clearly. Then she had been mapping her exit from the very start. She hadn't simply been spending. She had been insulating herself from the fallout. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "Watch me," she said. Her phone chimed. "Your car is here." She pushed herself off the wall. She didn't cast a look at the apartment door. She didn't glance at the life she was abandoning on the other side of it. She just straightened her coat and moved toward the elevator. Viveka, Colton called out. "Viveka, come back." You can't leave me here like this. She kept walking. She pressed the call button. The doors parted immediately as if the building itself was eager to see her go. She stepped in and turned to face him. For one brief moment, their eyes connected. Colton on the floor in a ruined suit, Vivica upright in the elevator, already calculating her next move. "Good luck, Colton," she said. "I hope you find a comfortable park bench." The doors closed. He was alone. He sat there a long time. The corridor's quiet returned, but it carried a different weight, now the full press of everything he had lost bearing down on him. He stared at the red light on the lock, still blinking, keeping him out, but in another sense, sealing the truth inside. He had lost the house. He had lost the car. He had lost his wife. He reached into his pocket and found his phone, 12% battery remaining. He opened his contacts. He scrolled past his drinking crowd. He scrolled past business associates. He scrolled past Viveka. His thumb stopped over my name. Dad. He pressed it. The phone rang. Once, twice. I was in my study rain on the window. His name came up on the screen. I knew precisely where he was sitting. I knew exactly who had just walked out on him. I let it ring. "Not yet, son," I said to the empty room. "You aren't ready. You are still reaching for a lifeline. You need to go lower. You need to feel the ground." I declined the call. In the hallway, Colton listened to it roll to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He simply let the phone slip from his fingers onto the thick carpet. He pulled his knees in tighter and pressed his face into his arms. And for the first time since he was a small child, my son wept. Not the hot, furious tears of someone who believes the world owes him more. These were the broken, heaving sobs of a man who has finally understood that he is completely, utterly alone. Desperation has a smell. Stale coffee, cheap cologne, and the sweat of fear. That was the scent that met me when I walked into the settlement conference room at the county courthouse 3 days later. Technically, I didn't have to be there. Aldrich had told me to stay home and let him manage the proceedings, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to find out whether humility had set in yet, or whether my son was still trying to run a bluff on a hand he'd already lost. He was still bluffing. Colton sat on the far side of a battered wooden table. He looked wrecked. Unwashed hair, red-rimmed eyes, wearing a suit that appeared to have served as his bedding. Seated beside him was his legal representation. Not a senior partner from some downtown tower. A man named Mr. Caulfield, whose business card likely advertised DUI defense and slip-and-fall claims on the back of a bus bench. Caulfield wore a suit, a full size too large, and kept tapping his pen on a yellow legal pad that remained almost entirely blank. Aldridge and I took our seats across from them. Aldridge set a single thick folder on the table. The sound it made landing on the wood was heavy, the sound of a gavel. Mr. Caulfield cleared his throat and tried to arrange his face into something resembling authority, though his eyes kept straying toward Aldridge's briefcase. "Gentlemen," Caulfield began, his voice thin, "we are here to file a countersuit against Mr. Gerald Harmon for fraud, undue influence, and predatory lending practices against a family member. My client asserts that the funds transferred to him over the past 10 years were gifts understood within the context of a father-son relationship to be non-repayable. The so-called promissory notes were executed under duress and without independent legal counsel. We are therefore moving to have the debt declared invalid." Colton nodded sharply. "That's right. You tricked me into putting my name on those papers, Dad. You told me it was just for your own records. You never had any intention of calling them in. That makes it fraud." I looked at my son across that table. He was clinging to whatever he could reach, trying to reconstruct history into something that cast him as the victim. He had genuinely convinced himself that if he said it loudly enough, the facts would rearrange themselves. Aldridge didn't respond. He didn't argue or raise his voice or challenge a single word. He opened the folder. He slid one sheet of paper across the table to Mr. Caulfield. "Exhibit A." Aldridge said, his tone unhurried. An email dated June 12, 2015, sent from Colton Harmon to Gerald Harmon. Subject line, "The Wedding." Caulfield picked up the sheet. He adjusted his glasses, read the highlighted portion Aldridge said. Caulfield read it aloud, his voice losing confidence with each word. "Dad, I know asking for 150 grand is a lot, but Viveka really wants this vineyard venue. I swear to you this is a loan. I will pay you back every cent once I get my commission from the Towers project. I'm a man of my word. Let me sign whatever paperwork is needed to make this binding." Aldridge pushed another document toward the center of the table. "Exhibit B," he read on. A text exchange from October 2013. About the Porsche, Colton writes, "I don't want a handout, Dad. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. Treat this car as an investment in my image. I will repay the principal plus interest. I want to do this the right way." Aldridge leaned in, fingers laced together on the table. "We are sitting on 47 pages of digital correspondence, Mr. Caulfield. Every single time money moved between these two men, your client put it down in writing that he meant to pay it back. The language he chose, loan investment debt. The word gift never appears. Not once." The color drained from Colton's face. He seemed to shrink into his seat. He had forgotten. Clears throat. He had forgotten every promise he'd made during those moments of desperation. He had forgotten that what goes into writing doesn't disappear the way a spoken word does. Caulfield's eyes moved across the documents. Then they moved to Colton. What he saw didn't sit well with him. It was the expression of a lawyer who has just realized his client fed him a story and walked him into a slaughterhouse. "You swore to me there was nothing on paper," Caulfield said through his teeth. "You said every bit of it was verbal." I didn't remember the emails," Colton managed. "But it doesn't change anything. He's my father. He set a trap." Aldridge reached for one last document, a screenshot the text Colton had sent me on my birthday. "And to close," Aldridge said, his tone dropping to something quiet and lethal. "Exhibit C, the message that triggered the acceleration clause. Don't expect us to take care of you. I have my own life." He turned to Caulfield. "Your client is alleging undue influence and invoking the warmth of a family bond as grounds for these being gifts. But this very message shows him cutting those ties, financial and emotional, with his own hands. Counsel, you cannot argue both sides of that coin. You cannot collect on the privileges of family while refusing to carry any of its weight." Caulfield's legal pad snapped shut. His pen went into his breast pocket. He'd seen enough. He understood that standing before a judge with this evidence wouldn't just end in a loss, it would be a humiliation. "I believe we are finished," Caulfield said, getting to his feet and reaching for his briefcase. Colton grabbed his sleeve. "Wait, what are you doing? You can't just leave. Fight back, Mr. Harmon." Caulfield pulled his arm free. "There is nothing to fight with. You confirmed the debt over and over again. Your signature is on the notes, and you burned the bridge with the lender in your own words. My recommendation, make a deal. Throw yourself on their mercy because they have every legal advantage here." He was out the door before anyone could respond. What came next was a silence with real weight to it. The hum of the air conditioner was all there was. Colton was alone on his side of the table, stripped of everything he'd walked in with. The swagger gone. The confidence dissolved. He lifted his eyes to mine. They were red at the edges, glistening. "Dad," he said barely above a breath. I rose. I did up my jacket button. What I felt wasn't victory. It was a bone-deep weariness, the kind that settles in your chest and stays. But I couldn't let it stop me. Too much had already been set in motion. "We will see you in court for the final judgment, Colton," I said. Then I walked away, leaving him behind with every email that showed he'd been a liar long before he ever became a failure. The door shut with a clean click, closing him in with the ruins of his own words. That click echoed the cheap lawyer was gone, and the silence left in his wake hit harder than any raised voice could have. My son remained on the far side of the table, caved in on himself, like a puppet dropped mid-performance. He stared at the vacant chair where his attorney had been sitting moments ago. Then he looked at me. Empty eyes. Never in his life had Colton looked at me the way he did in that moment. Not with the old contempt, not with the usual air of entitlement. This was something different. This was terror. He was peering over the edge of a very deep drop, and he knew I was the only one who could pull him back. Aldridge said nothing, just tapped his pen against the tabletop at a slow, even pace. That tapping was the only thing breaking the silence. Tap, tap, tap. Like something counting down. Colton dragged the back of his hand across his nose. "So where does that leave us?" he asked, his voice splintering. "You're going to ruin me. Strip everything away." I put my elbows on the table's worn surface and held his gaze steady. What I saw wasn't the 32-year-old man sitting across from me. I saw the frightened little boy who used to break things around the house and stuff the evidence under the nearest rug. "Ruining you isn't what I'm after, Colton," I said, keeping my voice even. "And I'm not after your money either. We both know there isn't much. Even if I move to seize your assets, the bank walks away with the car. The landlord reclaims the apartment, and whatever's left goes straight to the government. I'd be chasing crumbs." Colton stared at me thrown. Then what's the point? Why drag me through all of this? Because there are times when you have to scorch the earth before anything worth keeping can grow back. I said it plainly. Your financial world collapsed because every foundation under it was false. But I'm prepared to give you the opportunity to build something genuine. I reached inside my jacket. Not for another legal filing. What I brought out was a single page. No court seal, no attorney's signature, just words in my own hand. I set it in front of him. There's a door out of this, Colton. A fresh start. The full debt, all $482, the interest, the fees gone. Cleared completely. The lawsuit withdrawn today. Colton's eyes fixed on the paper. He sat very still. Then something ignited behind his eyes, raw, desperate hope. Really? His voice cracked on the word. You'd actually do that, Dad. Thank you. I swear I'll make it right eventually. I'll find work. I raised one hand. There are conditions. 2 of them. Neither one is up for discussion. He was nodding before I'd finished the sentence. Whatever it takes, name it. I'll take care of your yard. I'll repaint the house. Anything. I don't need yard work, Colton. What I need is a father for my grandson. I tapped the paper. It's your first condition. You pursue full custody of Theo. You make the case that his current home environment is unstable because it is. I've already secured an apartment for you. Nothing fancy but decent and clean. It's rent-free for 6 months as long as you hold down a job. He nodded without hesitation. I can do that. I want Theo with me. I love that kid. What's the second one? I drew in a slow breath. What came next was the hard part. It was surgical. Second condition, I said, my voice going flat. You file for divorce from Viveka right away. Something shifted in the room. The temperature seemed to drop. Colton pushed back from the table as though I'd thrown something at him. No, I won't do that, Dad. She's my wife. I love her. She is not the woman you believe her to be, Colton, I said, and I didn't soften it. She is a parasite. 5 years she's been living off you. She wedged you away from everyone in your family. She burned through resources you never had. And when this whole thing started going under 3 days ago, did she pick up a bucket and start bailing? No. She rolled up her yoga mat and walked out. She panicked. Colton shot back his face, going red. Anyone would under that kind of pressure? You don't understand what she's like. She loves me. This is just a rough stretch. I glanced across at Aldridge. He gave a slight nod and lifted a slim black folder. A bank statement slid across the table. I had a feeling you'd push back on that, I said. So I put Aldridge on it. We went deeper than your finances, Colton. We pulled hers apart, too. He looked down at the page. What am I looking at? A Pacific First Bank account, I told him. Registered under Viveka's maiden name. She opened it 3 years ago. Go through those deposits. His eyes moved down the columns. 200 here, 500 there, 1,000 transferred over. She's been calling it her rainy day fund, I said. Every time you came to me with your hand out, every commission that came through, every payment you believed was going toward your bills, she was quietly taking a cut. I watched his face as his eyes reached the figure at the bottom. $52,000, I said out loud. Colton fell silent. You could almost see him calculating. 6 months ago, I went on. My voice kept low and steady. You sat in my office in tears asking me for $50,000 to cover a gambling debt. You said you were terrified of Viveka finding out. You said if she did, your marriage was finished. He gave a slow nod. She had $52,000 in that account the whole time, Colton. While you were breaking down in front of your father and begging for help, your wife had more than enough sitting there to pull you out, and she never breathed a word of it. She let you go under. She sat there and watched you humiliate yourself. She sat there watching you ink a promissory note that cinched a noose around your own neck, all while keeping her money tucked away safe. Colton's hands trembled as he stared at the paper. The denial inside him was losing its fight against the numbers on the page, numbers that don't bend. Why? He breathed. Why would she do that? Because she was never in your corner, son, I said. She was wagering on your collapse, hedging her position. And when the money dried up 3 days ago, she didn't reach for her phone to offer you a lifeline. She reached for a divorce attorney. Aldridge nudged one final document across the table. A consultation receipt from a top-shelf family law firm dated the morning after the asset freeze. She's already out the door, Colton, I said, and I kept my voice quiet. The only thing left to decide is whether you let her drag you under with her or whether you cut yourself loose. Colton lifted the receipt. He checked the date. He checked the time. Time-stamped just 1 hour after I had frozen the accounts. While he'd been out on the curb in the rain falling apart, she was already handing over a retainer to dissolve their marriage. A sound came out of him, low, guttural, the noise of something caught in a trap, and knowing it, he crushed the receipt in his fist. He squeezed his eyes shut, and the tears came anyway, hot and fast. He remembered the look on her face in the hallway. Her words came back to him. I didn't marry a man, I married a potential. He thought of those bright orange sticky notes on my furniture. It landed on him all at once. He hadn't been a husband in that house. He'd been a host organism. He pulled in a breath, ragged, painful. But when his eyes opened again, something had shifted. The boy was no longer sitting in that chair. What I saw was a man battered, yes, cracked through, but a man who was finally looking at the world without the filter of delusion. Where do I sign? Colton asked. The words came out flat. Decided. I slid the agreement in front of him and placed a pen on top. You're making the right call, I said. Colton didn't respond. He picked up the pen and signed. Not the sweeping, arrogant flourish he used to put on those promissory notes. This was something different, a heavy, jagged mark on the page, the signature of a man closing out one chapter and scratching the first line of a new one. He set the pen down. I want my son, he said. I want Theo. You'll have him, I told him. I meant it. And you'll get your dignity back too. It may take a while. It may cost you something. But it'll be yours, not borrowed, not bought on credit. Yours. Colton pushed back his chair and stood. No handshake, no embrace. Just a single sharp nod of his chin. Thank you, Dad, he said. Then he walked out. He carried himself differently than he had in years, spine straighter, steps deliberate. He was broke. A divorce was coming. He had no roof of his own. But watching him cross that threshold, I knew something had finally been freed in him. The parasite had been cut away. The rest was recovery. Time is the only auditor that can't be fooled. It doesn't care what your credit score says or whose name is on the building. It only tallies what you do with the hours in front of you. For Colton, the past 12 months have been the heaviest of his life. But they've also been the most truthful. Yesterday, I drove out to the construction site in North Portland. The rain was coming down the way it does in Portland, steady and different, reminding you that the sky has its own schedule. I pulled my 6-year-old Chevy truck to the curb across the street and sat watching. The site was a new mid-rise apartment complex going up in the mud. Jackhammers competed with diesel engines, the whole block a wall of noise. And moving through the middle of it all, Colton. No charcoal Italian cut suit. A high visibility vest over a stained flannel shirt. No wine glass in his hand. A shovel. I watched him work. There was a rhythm to it I hadn't seen from him since he was a teenager playing varsity baseball, something earned rather than performed. His face was streaked with grime. Sweat darkened his collar. He looked wrung out, but he didn't look empty. A foreman came over calling something above the grind of a cement mixer. The old Colton would have let his eyes roll, would have muttered something cutting behind the man's back, would have measured himself against anyone in a hard hat and found them wanting. But this, Colton just gave a nod, dragged his sleeve across his forehead, and went back to it. He hauled a heavy bag of cement off of pallet muscles, working under the strain. No complaint, just the job. I found out later he earns $22 an hour, less than he used to drop on a single lunch without thinking about it. But every Friday that paycheck goes where it's supposed to go. His own rent on the studio, I helped him line up. His own groceries, his own bus pass because he still doesn't own a car. And he pays me. Every month without fail, an envelope arrives with a check inside for $200, a symbolic payment against a forgiven debt. I told him it wasn't necessary. He told me he needed to watch the number go down, even if it takes a lifetime. He said he needed to feel what he'd borrowed, the actual weight of it. As for Vivica, she evaporated about as fast as she'd materialized. Word reached me she was in Los Angeles inside of a week after the divorce papers were finalized. Instagram, as always, narrates what reality prefers to conceal. She's with a producer now, 20 years her senior. Yacht photos, red carpet appearances, diamonds that probably aren't hers to keep. She looks happy in that particular way, polished and brittle, the look of someone running hard from something they can't name. She never once checked on Colton, never asked a word about the debt, certainly never gave a thought to me. She simply molted her old life and slithered into a new one. I don't carry hatred for her. What I feel is closer to pity because eventually she'll exhaust every host available to her, and she'll be left facing a mirror showing her someone who has devoured everything in reach and is still hollow with hunger. But Colton is feeding himself now. I watched him pull out a lunch break on a stack of drywall, cracking open a plastic container, not Wagyu, a sandwich he had made with his own hands. And he wasn't eating alone. There were two other workers beside him, and the three of them were laughing, not the careful, calculated laughter you perform in a boardroom, but the deep, unguarded kind that comes out of a man with nothing left to fake. He spotted my truck. His jaw slowed. He stood up. For a beat, I wondered if he'd be mortified if he'd look away. Instead, he raised his hand. A simple, worn-out wave. I waved back. He tapped his watch to get back and turned toward the shovel. He didn't cross the street to ask for anything. He didn't come over to catalog his grievances. He saw me, acknowledged me, held the line between us with some dignity, and went back to work. That shovel is doing more for his understanding of money than his business degree ever managed. It's showing him that a dollar isn't an abstraction, it's life energy made tangible, time converted into something you can hold. When that clicks, you stop buying a Porsche to impress people whose opinions don't matter. You start buying a solid pair of boots because you know the road ahead is long. I turned the key in the ignition. There was nothing more to see. My son was no longer a millionaire on paper. He was a thousandaire in practice. And for the first time in 32 years, I felt something I can only call pride, not for anything he owned or achieved, but for the way he was shouldering what he'd lost without flinching. The lake was still that morning, a flat mirror throwing the gray sky back at itself, the clouds drifting without any particular hurry. I was out on the wooden dock, feet hanging above the water, watching a red and white bobber hold its position on the surface. Theo sat beside me, gripping his small fishing rod, with the gravity of someone engaged in serious business. No tablet in his lap. No requests for a screen, just the water and the waiting, and a boy beginning to learn what patience actually feels like. It has been a year since I declared war on my own son. A year since I concluded that being a real father sometimes means accepting the role of villain in your child's story, so that one day he can author his own redemption. People invoke unconditional love as though it requires unconditional tolerance of destruction, as though love is nothing more than a warm covering you pull around your children to shield them from anything that might sting. What I've come to understand is that love can also be the cold itself. Love can be the hard wind that tears away what's dead, so that something living has room to emerge. I looked over at Theo. He's growing up in a world his father never knew, a small apartment. A dad who comes through the door at the end of the day worn down with dirt worked under his nails. A dad who checks the grocery total before he puts things in the cart. And because of that, Theo is learning what a dollar actually means, before he's ever tackled long division. He's learning that respect is built with your hands over time, not charged to a card and delivered overnight. Colton is not the man I once imagined he'd become. He's something better, quieter. He listens far more than he talks. The arrogance that used to cling to him like a bad coat of varnish has been worn down by the steady friction of an honest life. He's roughed up, but he's genuine. And when he looks at me now for the first time, he doesn't see a source of funds. He sees a man. I drew my line in a little feeling the water push back. There is a ledger sitting in my safe, and it is finally balanced. The debt has been settled not in dollars, but in character. I've come to understand that the greatest thing I can leave behind has nothing to do with the house, or the portfolio, or the antique furniture. It's the conviction that you are only owed what you earn. It's the understanding that rock bottom is the most solid ground there is to build on. Theo's bobber suddenly dropped beneath the surface. He sucked in a breath, eyes going wide. "Grandpa, I've got one," he hollered. I didn't lean over to grab the rod. I didn't offer to take it from him and finish the job. I settled back and watched him struggle with it, watched him concentrate, watched him work it out on his own. "You've got this, Theo," I told him quietly. "It's all you." And as I watched him haul that fish up out of the water, silver and flashing in the flat gray light, I knew that the Harmon legacy was secure, not on account of what I handed down, but because of what I held back. In the end, the harshest thing I ever did turned out to be the most loving. I stopped rescuing my son so that he could finally discover how to rescue himself. A checkbook, I've learned, is the worst instrument a father can reach for. Real love isn't about keeping your children dry through every storm. It's about making sure they know how to put a roof over their own heads. When I cut Colton off, I didn't walk away from him. I handed him back something he'd lost his dignity. He resented me for tearing things down, but he's grateful for what got built in its place. To every parent out there, don't be afraid to be the villain in the short chapter if it means being the reason they become the hero of the longer one. That afternoon on the dock, watching Theo pull a small fish out of still water, all on his own, was worth more to me than anything that ever hung on my walls or sat in my driveway. This road cost me years of sleep and more heartache than I care to measure. I had to become the man my son resented before I could become the man he needed. I believe God doesn't always hand us the easy path. Sometimes he hands us the right one, and those are rarely the same road. What I refused to give, Colton turned out to be the greatest thing I ever gave him. If these father stories have taught me anything worth passing on here, it is, document every loan you make to family. A signed agreement protects the relationship, it doesn't threaten it. When someone shows you who they are under pressure, believe them the first time. Don't wait for the third. Rock bottom is not the end of a person's story. It is the only foundation solid enough to build something real on. Don't write the check that saves them from the lesson they were meant to learn. These are the grandpa revenge stories I never wanted to live, but I'm glad I had the courage to see them through to the other side. If this story moved, you share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if you haven't yet, come join us here on Grandpa's Revenge. There are more stories where this one came from. Thank you for being here with me. Until next time, take care of each other.